We're taking a look at the NHL Trade Deadline and what a big deal could mean for some big fantasy names.
You're Locked On Fantasy Hockey, your daily podcast on fantasy hockey. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is going on out there, hockey heads? And welcome back to the Locked On Fantasy Hockey Podcast, part of the Locked On Network. We are here with my boy Steele Roden for episode 9, and we are excited to feed you what we always do: winners, daily fantasy selections, and a little bit of fantasy breakdown. But first, today's episode is brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline has you covered this season with more props, odds, and lines than ever before. BetOnline, where the game starts. Like I said, guys, we are excited as always to be here. I'm here with my co-host, Steele Roden. He is a recent graduate of the College of Sports Media. He is a daily fantasy guru, and you can check out all of his work on YouTube. Check it out under NHL Quick Hits. I'm your boy, Big Flip Livingstone. You've seen a little bit of my work everywhere, from the Hockey Night in Canada platforms to the Score app. And we are really excited to have you here for a jam-packed episode where we're taking a look at the NHL Trade Deadline and what some trades could mean for some big fantasy names. We'll obviously be feeding you with Tuesday night's daily fantasy selections, and of course, rounding out the show with my favorite segment, Best Bets. Steele and I are starting to pick up. We're starting to heat up, so stick with us. Make sure you hammer that subscribe button and like across. Our content is out there across all platforms where you find your favorite podcasts, including Spotify and Apple Music. Check us out on YouTube, Monday to Friday. We're here for you. We got your back on the fantasy front. Steele, let's get right into it, brother. Let's talk NHL Trade Deadline and what some big trades could mean for some big fantasy names.
Yeah, we're already at the halfway point of the NHL season, so that kind of marks when a lot of lists start to come out for trade bait and people that are on the trade block amongst the teams. So you start to get the feel of the big name players who are potentially on the move heading into the trade deadline or before the trade deadline. But there's a lot of big names out there. It was very hard to pick a couple of them, I wanted to talk about all of them. So I only had the choice of picking two out. And I think the big first name that really intrigued me here was Marc Giordano of the Seattle Kraken. Looking at the stats so far this season, 267 fantasy points in Yahoo fantasy leagues, 18 points in 40 games so far this season. He's a veteran blue liner who's on a struggling team, last in that Pacific Division. So I think this is another guy who can bring a lot to the table for a team pushing into the playoffs or one of those high-end contending teams. A lot of the defensemen do hit the trade block prior to the trade deadline because it seems like all teams are in need of a real strong defensive defenseman going into the postseason or heading into the final stage of the season. So the team that really struck out to me that I think should make a move on Marc Giordano were the New York Rangers. And I think that team comes to mind, and it can really set them over the top heading into the postseason. We've talked about them, like, maybe are they that top tier contending team heading into the playoffs? I believe so. I think there's a lot of doubt out there for people watching this Rangers team, but I think acquiring a guy like Marc Giordano would really set them over the top here. They were interested in making a deal with him at the expansion draft. Obviously, they weren't able to get it done. He's got 1 year left at $6.75 million. The Rangers have plenty of cap space. And could you imagine Marc Giordano just filling up the top four defensive pair for this Rangers team? Like, he'll be playing with Jacob Trouba, Adam Fox, Mika Zibanejad, Artemi Panarin, all these stars on the New York Rangers that can really help his game right now because, like I said, he's only got 18 points in 40 games. So you could imagine what he can do for fantasy owners out there as well. So this is a guy that if he were to be traded at the deadline to a team like the New York Rangers or even just a better team than the Seattle Kraken, it could be really, really beneficial for your fantasy team. I would look for him to acquire him if he was traded before the deadline.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you make a couple of good points with Giordano there. When I think of a player of his makeup, it almost makes him the go-to prototypical kind of defenseman you want to add at the deadline. Low risk, You know what you're getting with him. Very reliable track record. You know what I'm saying? Like, if a team is taking a flyer on a one, rental for a push kind of a thing, I could see it being a guy like Giordano. I think in terms of fantasy value, right, we're highlighting guys here that are going to benefit the most from a change of scenery. And I think Giordano would be one of those guys. I look to another veteran, Steele, in Marc-Andre Fleury in the Chicago Blackhawks roster right now, who, I think his track record speaks for itself in terms of track records go. The reigning Vezina winner is going to be highly sought after this trade deadline. Obviously, if he goes anywhere to a contender, which you would assume with him having a 10-team no trade clause that he is only going to a contender, it could be huge for fantasy value. Now, he, even this year at 14-6-3 with 3 shutouts, he still had value even playing on the ragtag Chicago Blackhawks crew. The teams that are rumored to be in the mix for Flower are the Washington Capitals, Colorado Avalanche, even the Edmonton Oilers. Obviously, they need a goalie. If he goes to any of those teams, especially the first two, I could see his fantasy value skyrocketing. Obviously, Washington and Colorado have more of a shot at it this year, I would say. But if he even goes to a team like Edmonton, it's still an improvement, and it's a playoff push that we know Flower elevates his game for. He's one of the best to do it. Reigning Vezina winner. And I could see a deal happening at the deadline if he moves his no trade clause, and it could be a huge scenario where you definitely want to keep an eye on Fleury, or maybe even roll the dice and try and acquire him now, knowing that he is so highly sought after. You might be, again, like I like to say, thanking us later.
I would be really shocked if he wasn't traded before the deadline. So I think you make a great point there. Taking a shot in the dark right now because his name has been tossed around so much this entire season. So I like your point there. Taking a shot in the dark. It feels like he will be on the move. I think, because he was so hesitant to even go to Chicago, he was even potentially thinking about retiring. I think this might be potentially his last year, maybe one more year at best. But I like your point there. Taking a shot in the dark on a guy like Marc-Andre Fleury, whose name has been tossed around a lot recently this season. My second guy, like I mentioned, there's a lot of defensemen that get put on the list for the trade deadline, and a lot of guys who, like I mentioned, are on struggling teams. And that's who I went to with my second guy here, Ben Sherrod of the Montreal Canadiens. He's got 282 fantasy points this season. I like him a lot. I actually do have him on my fantasy team. And even though he's not the type of guy who's going to put up a lot of points offensively, he gets a ton of points in the other stats across the board: shots blocked, and hits, all above 80 in those categories. I think hits, he's at like 140 right now. So he gets majority of his fantasy points in those categories right there. But could you think about, like I said, for Marc Giordano, if he gets traded to a better team right now, and the team I was kind of looking at was the Edmonton Oilers, actually. They could probably retain some of Sherrod's, the Canadiens could retain some of Sherrod's salary. The Oilers could send some prospects like Dylan Holloway, or even the Montreal Canadiens could take on some pending free agents of the Edmonton Oilers as well. But if he were to go to a team like the Edmonton Oilers, he's taking so much pressure off Darnell Nurse. Again, another guy in Duncan Keith, who's 36, 37 years old right now. So he's taking a lot of pressure off the guys like that. And his stats would go up tremendously. He'd be playing with the two best players in the NHL right now, Connor McDavid and Leon Draisaitl. He'll have the opportunity to potentially be on that second power play unit. He's a great PK, a penalty killer as well. So he's going to take a lot of pressure off for those guys on the back end. And like we've already talked about, Flip, the Edmonton Oilers need to go out and get a starting goaltender and a top four defenseman, and they go out and get a Vander Kane. So by far at the trade deadline or before the trade deadline, they need to make a move for a defenseman, and I think Ben Sherrod should be their guy.
Yeah, Sherrod, again, just like Giordano, you almost know what you're getting with a guy like Sherrod, and you mentioned what they bring in terms of that veteran leadership, but also I think we've talked about the type of hockey that happens when the playoff season starts. It's those tough grinding, clear the front of the net, tight checking, and Sherrod
He's going to hit
that
everything
game
that moves.
Yeah, exactly. So he plays that game to a T. And again, if he goes to a team like the Edmonton Oilers, obviously he's going to start chipping in offensively just by being out on the ice with guys like McDavid and Draisaitl. So you can't ignore that angle as well. And from this like shot in the dark kind of a thing, and maybe move on some of these guys ahead of the time, because if trade deadline comes around or even before, and these guys move to situations that are a lot more advantageous fantasy wise, the price you're going to have to pay or the availability of these guys is going to be not doable. So make sure that you're following along here, because we don't miss very often. And these are some guys that you want to make sure that you keep your eye on. One other guy that I want to keep my eye on is John Klinberg, a guy who has gone from, being in the conversation for the Norris to, he's seen a steady decline in his offensive numbers, but still effective. Even this year facing injury, he has 22 assists and a goal for 23 points. And the guy's finished in the Norris top 6 in Norris voting in the past handful of years. And his offensive stats speak for themselves. He is going to be a valuable piece for a team looking for a puck-moving defenseman. I'll get to those teams in a minute that I think he could slot into nicely. But the writing's been on the wall in Dallas as well. So when we're talking about these situations that could be hugely advantageous by a player moving to a new city or a new team, Klinberg is right at the top of that list, because aside from what he's going to be owed in a contract, which is going to be big numbers, aside from his age, which is getting up there, and those little bit of declines, Miro Heiskanen and Esa Lindell have stepped up huge in Dallas. They've made Klinberg a little bit expendable, and I really do expect him to be on the move. I don't know what you think about that, Steele.
I expect him to be on the move too, and I actually wrote down a couple of notes about another guy that you and I want to discuss as well. But before we get to that conversation, I think we should leave him, just at the beginning of the second segment.
I'm loving that. I'm loving that for sure. We can definitely dive right back into that, because I need to let everyone know out there about Primal Origin oils. Yeah, that's right. Got beard? Get Primal. You heard me right. Got beard? Get Primal. If you or someone you care about has a beard, it needs to get Primal. Maybe you're that guy who's never considered the benefits of treating your beard with product. Primal Origin oils will stop the itch and make your beard look healthy and groomed. The products are free from harmful synthetic ingredients with low impact on the planet, so it's sustainable. Primal Origin oils makes balms, oils, and whip butter that are renowned to feel the best and be the best beard products available. All products are fair trade certified and handcrafted in the US of A, and the combo kits make a great holiday gift if you're shopping for yourself. Trust me, you'll be glad you did. We know that every company claims to have the best, but Primal Origin Oils challenges you to compare their ingredients and feel in the beard the other products you've used. We promise you'll see and feel the difference. So remember, the code LOCKEDON gets you 20% off at primaloriginoils.com. Use the code LOCKEDON. Check out for 20% off. Thank us later.
Thanks again for making Locked On Fantasy Hockey Podcast your first listen every day. Make sure to check out Olympic Hockey Daily, presented by Locked On NHL, a bonus podcast covering all the action in Beijing. You can find it on the Locked On NHL podcast feed. It's free and available wherever you get your podcasts. Just like this podcast right now, make sure you go subscribe and follow us as well at the Locked On Fantasy Hockey Podcast. We appreciate all the support. And before we jump into the DFS segment, I want to touch on the guy that we talked about earlier today, and that was Claude Giroux of the Philadelphia Flyers. Flip. You mentioned John Klingberg, some of the destinations that he can go to. That's actually one of the trade destinations I had for both of these players. I had Claude Giroux for John Klingberg, and I think that works out tremendously for both of these clubs.
Yeah, I was actually to finish my point on Klinberg and a need for a puck moving defenseman. I think the Boston Bruins would be a good fit as well. They almost always make a move ahead of the deadline to for that playoff push. So I could definitely see him being a fit in Boston. They need to fill a hole on the left side. So I think keep an eye on a guy like Klinberg overall, who could really benefit from a change of scenery. I think much like you just mentioned with a guy like Claude Giroux, who I think obviously needs to change cities and change teams at this point in his career.
Yeah, well, he's 36 years old, hasn't won a Stanley Cup yet. He's been with Philadelphia Flyers his entire career. We see this a lot with older, I wouldn't say older, but I guess older players in the NHL right now. We've seen it over the last couple of years. Patrick Marleau, Joe Thornton, a bunch of other guys in the league, etc. But a guy like Claude Giroux, he's probably thinking, like if I want a Stanley Cup before I, retire eventually, I'm gonna have to think about moving to a different team, a different location, and that's probably what's going to happen this year before the trade deadline. Like I mentioned, I think, a 1-for-1 or even a couple of assets, depending on how you look at it. Claude Giroux for John Klingberg. I think it really helps the Dallas Stars up front. It helps the Philadelphia Flyers on the back end, who are really, missing out on Ryan Ellis, who's been absent this entire season so far. I also looked at the Minnesota Wild, Claude Giroux for a guy like Matt Dumba or Kevin Fiala potentially. So there's a lot of situations out there from, the Philadelphia Flyers looking out west. I can see it happening.
I like it.
Yeah, so for Claude Giroux, you'll definitely have to keep your eye on him. 35 points in 42 games this season. He's been no slouch for the Philadelphia Flyers, but the Flyers have definitely let him down. Let's jump right into our DFS segment here. There's 7 games on the schedule for Tuesday night. A lot of juicy matchups, in my opinion, but the one that really stuck out for me, I don't know if you're going to agree with me here, Flip, but it's the Columbus Blue Jackets versus the Washington Capitals. And I'm taking the top line for the Columbus Blue Jackets, Boone Jenner and Patrick Laine. I don't think they're going to be too expensive. They should be in the medium price range, probably around $5,000 to $5,500, I'd say. But I like the way, this matchup is trending. TJ Oshie, Alexander Ovechkin out of the lineup. Vanacek is also out of the lineup. So for me, I like the way it's setting in stone for the Columbus Blue Jackets.
Yeah, it's also, I know that the Blue Jackets do give their interdivision rival there a bit of a rough ride over the past couple of years in terms of the head-to-head. You mentioned some some injuries and some COVID issues there with the big names on Washington. I think you can't overlook a guy like Boone Jenner, who already has 18 goals this year and has clearly got that goal-scoring caliber. We're always a little wary of backing a team with a roster that's a little bit lackluster, like the Columbus Blue Jackets. But I like this situation for a good interdivisional matchup where with the injuries and with, Vanacek going down, I like this spot for the Blue Jackets. And I think you could probably get a couple of guys on that top line at good value.
Yeah. And, like I said, there's 7 games on the schedule. Like I was also looking at the Vancouver Canucks and Arizona Coyotes. That could be an easy matchup. The Vegas Golden Knights versus Edmonton Oilers. That's also a juicy matchup. I just don't know if I want to spend a lot of money. That could be a tight game between, some really talented forwards up there. So the game I was actually looking at, I don't know if you're going to agree with me, but this is what I'm going with.
Here we go.
It's the Montreal Canadiens versus the New Jersey Devils. And I'm going again with the top line of the Montreal Canadiens because
oh my goodness.
Hey, hear me out here, Flip. The Devils are in a second.
I'm loving
game
it. I'm ready for the explanation here.
So the Devils are playing the second game of a back-to-back. They played the Ottawa Senators on Monday night. I'm really inclined to go with the Canadiens' top forwards in this matchup. They do have some tremendous amount of players injured right now, like Cole Caulfield for one of them, but you can still find a lot of value on their top guys, Nick Suzuki, Tyler Toffoli, Arturi Lehkonen. I think because they are a really bad team, they shouldn't be as expensive. So those are guys you can look to fill your utility spot. Like I mentioned in the earlier segment, Ben Sherrod is a guy to fill up on the back end as well. And again, we've already mentioned it. The New Jersey Devils have been absolutely terrible this season, and especially the last couple of weeks.
Yeah, that's the book is out on the New Jersey Devils. And in their defense, injuries and all kinds of things thrown their way in terms of not being able to employ a goalie that is not reminiscent of Swiss cheese. But I think the way that you're breaking down these games, Steele, offer a lot of value for Tuesday's DFS board, which I always like, especially when you look at the New Jersey Devils. I don't think you can really go wrong with anyone going up against them right now. And obviously, Nick Suzuki, the Montreal has had their own struggles, but they still have some talented players like Nick Suzuki. So he was at the All-Star game this past weekend. Maybe he's got some of that Vegas juice still flowing through his veins. Who knows? But it's a tricky board for DFS. I will say, when I was looking at it, Tuesday is not exactly right for the pickings, if you will. But I like what you've broken down, Steele, and I like where we're headed for Tuesday's DFS picks.
Yeah, and I was just trying to find some value there for utility spots as well as some cheap options. Again, I'll just top it off with this right now. For your goaltending, I'd go with Thatcher Demko or Antti Raanta. I believe, Antti Raanta or Frederik Andersen. For me, I'd probably go with Thatcher Demko because it is the Arizona Coyotes. But again, for me, that's who I'm going with for my DFS. And just to finish it off with that, BetOnline, they have you covered this season with more props, odds, and lines than ever before as football continues its march through the playoffs right into the Super Bowl this upcoming weekend. But it's not just football. BetOnline has up-to-the-minute info on pro and college hoops, NHL, boxing, UFC, along with live real-time updates of current games. BetOnline, it's where the game starts. Thank you so much for making Locked On Fantasy Hockey Podcast your first listen every day. Make sure you go and subscribe and follow to us on all podcast platforms. We are free and available on all platforms, as well as on YouTube. We appreciate all the support you give us. So thank you so much from Flip and I. We appreciate it all the time. That being said, just mentioning BetOnline, let's get into the Big Time Bet segment. Flip, your favorite segment. That's where the money's made. I love me some money, winning some money for that matter. And, looking at those juicy matchups that we just talked about, there's some great odds here, Flip.
There is some great odds, Steele. As much as I mentioned it being a bit of a tough board from a DFS perspective, I'm always ready to go on the picks front. We're in the booth, we're in the office, we're in the lab cooking up treats on the betting front for you guys every single night. So tonight, Steele, I have 2 picks for you guys. I'm hoping you're feeling it. I don't know what Steele's going on over there. We've had some side bets going recently. We don't always see eye to eye. Things are getting spicy up in this place. But my first pick for Tuesday night is the Pittsburgh Penguins at Boston Bruins. I'm going under the number here, under 6. I talked on yesterday's show about how I expect this next little stretch of games to be some sort of measuring stick situation for some of these teams going up against each other that have playoff aspirations. We talked about it last night with the Carolina Hurricanes and Toronto Maple Leafs. I see that again tonight with the Penguins at Bruins. I like this to be a playoff atmosphere type game, a see where you're at for the second half. Penguins struggled mightily going into the break on a losing skid of, I think, 5 or 6. So I think that they come out in a big way to play their game, tight defensive, tight checking. That number could be higher. I like it at 6. 7 of the last 8 Bruins games against Pittsburgh have gone under the number. I like this game to be a little bit of a sleeper. I could see it being 3-2, 3-1. But my first pick of Tuesday night is under 6, Pittsburgh and Boston.
I like the matchup you chose there, Flip, but I am afraid I have to stay away from the under on this game just because,
Fair.
It could happen. It could be a tight-knit game, but there's just so many superstars, so many talented players. You never know how many goals are going to get scored in a minute. We've seen it over the last couple of weeks. The Florida Panthers especially have been just filling the net. So these two teams have some special players. I'm going to stay away from the under on this game, but I do like the Pittsburgh Penguins money line at plus 110. Okay. They are on the road. I believe Evgeny Malkin is out with COVID-19, so he is not in for this game as well. But again, like we've talked about so many times before, Tristan Jarry has been absolutely spectacular this season. Top 3 goalie, running for the Vezina Trophy this season as well. That top line of Sidney Crosby, Rust, and Gensel have been absolutely spectacular. So for me, I'm going with the Pittsburgh Penguins on the money line. I'm going to take it every single time if they're at plus 110, especially with the way they've been playing this year.
Yeah, with Malkin out too, I like that for my under. So I'm feeling that Malkin COVID little sideline there. So I'll take that, Steele. What else are you feeling for Tuesday night?
So I mentioned the Columbus Blue Jackets top line for the DFS segment. I am taking them on the money line at plus 225. Big odd right there. So I'm going with the Blue Jackets money line. Like you mentioned, Boone Jenner has been absolutely filling the net this season. Definitely helps that he's playing on that top line with Patrick Laine, who, again, Laine, he's got 21 points in 24 games. He's been no slouch this season at all either. So for me, on the road against the Capitals, they are 7-11-1 all time against the Capitals on the road, I believe. But with that being said, with all the injuries the Capitals have right now, guys being sidelined, plus 225 Columbus Blue Jackets, that is my bet right there.
Yeah, I don't hate it. I love it for the value as well. We talked about that being, a Metro Division rivalry as well. I like it for the odd for sure. I wish you nothing but the best. I'm going to stay away from that one. But for the odds and the angle there, I would back your pick with the Blue Jackets. I'm going to hit you with my lock of the night, Steele. We've been feeling the player props. You've been hitting them. I've been hitting them. We, unfortunately, because we do sometimes record ahead of time, I can't give you the exact odds on these, but that's not to say that they're not quality picks. So listen up and stay with me here. Vegas Golden Knights head into Edmonton on Tuesday night to play the first game of the second half for both clubs. This is how I'm looking at it. Connor McDavid's still sitting at the top in all important offensive categories. He's in the mix for the Art Ross. He's up there at most of the important offensive categories, like I just said. But he was still a little bit inconsistent in the first half, don't you think, Steele? He could have been better. He went some stretches of games without scoring, and that really hurt Edmonton's chances, no?
I know. I completely agree with you there.
Thank you. So hold on here. Edmonton is within striking distance now in the Pacific, and they absolutely need a B second half out of Connor McDavid. As much as he has been good, he needs to be better. They are at home to kick off the second half. They just loaded up with Evander Kane. There's rumors swirling about them making other big moves at the deadline to maybe go for it this year, which I could honestly see it happening if, the stars align. Hang with me. McJesus, anytime assist versus the Vegas Golden Knights. He has a great track record against the Golden Knights with 7 goals and 10 assists in 12 regular season games. McJesus, anytime assist. Connor McDavid, anytime assist on Tuesday night against the Vegas Golden Knights. That is my lock of the night, and you can pencil that one in.
Hey, that's a great pick. You can't go wrong with any type of player prop on McDavid or Leon Draisaitl for that matter. If these guys put up points like it's absolutely no problem. It is their day job. I was going to say they put up points like it's their day job, but it is their day job. But
and their night job, too.
Yeah, exactly. So for that, honestly, you can't go wrong. I actually finished off with a player prop bet of my own.
Nice.
And I've got to go to my boy here, Kevin Fiala of the Minnesota Wild.
Who?
Kevin Fiala, anytime. I haven't chosen which one I want yet, but it's either Kevin Fiala anytime goal or anytime point or anytime assist in that game against the Winnipeg Jets for me. He's got a 12-game point streak right now, 16 points in total, 9 of those being goals. So for me, we haven't seen the odds yet, like you mentioned, but I believe he's probably going to be plus 150 or even over that. But again, for those odds, which I'm just assuming at this point, 12-game point streak, 9 of those being goals. I like Kevin Fiala going up against the Winnipeg Jets to start the second half of the season, especially against the Jets who, they were playing really, really bad for the first half of the season, I got to say.
Yeah, hard to put a finger on what's really going on in Winnipeg. Obviously, change of coach. They've dealt with injuries to key pieces. Every team's dealt with some sort of COVID issue. Yeah, it's one of those teams that it's really hard to put a finger on what's been going on. Maybe the second half reveals some answers there, but I like your Fiala pick, and I like the odds on him as well. Let's see what shakes down on Tuesday night, Steele.
We'll see what happens. So Flip's lock of the night, anytime assist from Connor McJesus over there. My lock of the night, it's going to be the Pittsburgh Penguins money line at plus 110. Those are the two locks of the night. Write them down, put them in your notebook. Make sure you place some bets on them. We'll make sure we win you some money. Thanks for making Locked On Fantasy Hockey Podcast your first listen every day. If you want more gambling advice and what you should pick every day, make your second listen Locked On Bets, your daily one-stop shop for all your gambling needs. Locked On Bets, hosted by your boy Q, with insight from Lee Sterling. It's free and available on all platforms, just like this podcast right now. So make sure you subscribe. Make sure you follow this podcast on your favorite podcast platform or on YouTube, and you'll get the latest episodes of Locked On Fantasy Hockey as soon as it's available every single day. From Flip and I, thank you again for tuning into the podcast today. Good luck with your bets. Have a great day, and we shall see you back here again tomorrow night.